Hello, welcome back. Today I am reading from chapter 8 of my book, Sparrowmancer, which you can get in paperback or on Kindle from Amazon. Morning warmed, and the cold stars fled from it. Sparrow awoke to the sound of the surf. Seabirds cried in the distance, desperate for better wind. The wind came and blew them away. They cheered as they rowed it out toward the open ocean. Chook was awake by the fire. Sparrow stood, stretched, and went to sit beside her. "We did it," he said. "You were so strong. I'm proud of you." Chook pushed her hair from her face. The wind that had carried the seagulls away pulled strands loose from her braids. She undid them. "I want to go back. Or rather, you want to go back," she said. "But you can't." "I have to," Sparrow replied. But Chook said, "You don't have to give everything you have for every miserable spirit in this world." Sparrow considered that. He'd never had such a thought before. "If I can help, then I have to," he said. "I understand why you feel that way," Chook said, finally looking at him. "And I believe you could save that poor girl. I saw everything that happened to her, and I hurt for her too. I do. But you don't have to be the one who saves everybody." "Leaving her to suffer would be wrong," Sparrow said. But Chook said, "Her suffering may be real, but you have a choice to protect yourself. You are not in this world to serve every needful thing. I know how you suffer for the magic you do." Sparrow shook his head. This was unimaginable. "If I decided once to help myself instead of someone else," he said, "then I could decide that I will always do that. It's selfish. It makes me a needful thing." But Chook put her hand on Sparrow's. Her ring and middle fingers were the same length. Her lunulae were unusually small and almost pink. "If you serve yourself, Sparrow," she said, "you will do so with the same careful consideration for goodness with which you do everything. You will not become a screaming ghost haunting people, because that is not who you are. You are someone. You are not everyone. Even after seeing my mind, you think I'm good?" "Yes," Chook said. "Of course I do." They stayed on the shore for a few days. Chook was exhausted. Sparrow wasn't sure whether he was exhausted or not. He felt distant from himself. It wasn't a bad feeling. There was a softness to it. It was comfortable. Sparrow built a shelter with materials he'd collected in the wasteland. ski poles, timber, tarpaulin. Machuk slept in it on his rubber blanket. Sparrow tried to fish from the beach with an improvised spear. The fish he caught were small and red. He cooked them and served them to Machuk. Though he was hungry, he ate very little himself. He wanted to know how long he could go without eating. Hunger might be an illusion. He couldn't be sure. Finally, Machuk convinced him to answer the ache in his stomach, and he felt better, even if that relief was an illusion too. He decided he wanted it. Will they accept me in Yim? Sparrow asked one night while they were roasting some red fish over the fire. I still don't know, Machuk replied. Nothing has changed since you asked me before. I feel like it has, Sparrow said. You'll have to hide your injuries. Machuk put her hand on his chest, covering one of the particle fire wounds through which his endoskeleton was visible. And your hoverbike. Sparrow was still wearing the jacket he'd stolen. It had no buttons, and he couldn't close it. Now he took it off. What will they do if they find out I'm a machine? He said. Machuk smiled a little. Well, they won't forgive you. Darkness continued to oppress Sparrow. He became anhedonic. He would stand in the water, watching the birds, the sunrise red in the sky, and he would feel destroyed. At one point he considered abstaining from magic indefinitely. This helped turn him around. The thought of losing his connection to the true world was terrifying. He committed to a pretense that he was still open to joy that started slowly to become real. Tell me about magic, Machuk asked him. They were together in the debris shelter, their fire burning near them. Its flame was red, orange, and yellow. There was no corruption here. To merely talk about magic is to make a category error, Sparrow replied. Magic is a way to experience the world, the way the world experiences itself. It isn't an art or a science, and it doesn't overlap with either of those things. Connecting with magic begins with open feeling. Feeling is the gateway. It's all about being small, looking beyond your own interpretations of your mind, and accepting that the idea that your experience of self is necessarily yours is fundamentally wrong. Nothing is yours. Ownership is an illusion. Machuk nodded and said, but Sparrow wasn't sure she understood. Had he articulated himself well? He'd never been able to tell, not with anyone, and not since the Green Lands. The constant uncertainty was alienating. I've lived my entire life believing that machines were incapable of feeling, she said. I wonder if there's anyone else like you. I don't know, Sparrow said. Why do you continue with magic if using it causes you so much emotional pain? LeChuck asked. Why choose to suffer? Sparrow didn't have to think about his answer. He'd said it before. Magic is something I can do, and it is my duty and my pleasure to do what I can. LeChuck smiled. That sounds like programming to me. You may be right, Sparrow replied. There's more, though, if the pat answer's not good enough for you. Magic is part of the world. Being without it would feel like a kind of blindness. And there's an emotional component to your resolution, LeChuck said. That's reassuring. Sparrow thought about the gone spirit, her sunny dress and her bobby socks, the spider climbing out of her, the terror she must feel. This tore at him. That girl's spirit is suffering, he said. You're not responsible for her. Who am I responsible for? LeChuck sighed. Sparrow thought that she was like the ocean, and that he was like light playing across her surface. Yourself, she said. Sparrow agreed not to go back to that haunted town, but he went back in his mind. When LeChuck said she was ready, she helped him pack their things into his saddlebags. They left whatever they couldn't carry abandoned on the beach. Yim was only a few days away. They rode the Strand Line through starry nights, and the saline wind caressed them. They talked about magic, and about Wren, and the green lands Sparrow had left. LeChuck wanted to know about him. Now that she had seen into him, it seemed she'd unlearned her fear of machines. Or maybe she'd just deepened her capacity for acceptance a bit, broadened her horizons. Sparrow was amazed at her ability to change. He felt immutable himself, stiff as stone. At last, Yim appeared on the beach. It was more than Sparrow had expected, more than white wood and gilded hinges. He was surprised to see that it was built in a gone ruin. Spires lunged up from the sand, higher than anything he'd ever seen. The city sprawled across the beach to dip its toes in the tide. Boats with tall white sails stood out from it. Wrack and other greenery grew dense around it. Banks of healthy bee palms, frilly cheddar pink, creeping saltbrush and red sand verbena, smoke rose from its tubular chimneys. This must have been a paradise before the world was gone. Look at it, Sparrow said as they sped toward the city. It's amazing. No description I've ever heard has done it justice, LeChuck replied. I had no idea my people built like this. That's a gone city, Sparrow explained. The Naveb must have scooped it out, burned all the machines, but they're still living in the gone buildings, it looks like. What brought them here in the first place, and who will we meet when we get there? There's a council, Machuk said. The leader changes. Sparrow wore a shirt they'd found on the wastes. It had blood stains on it. He wondered whose blood it was. It was a gone shirt, sturdy and warm. Maybe some gone person had died in it. Now they were nothing, as he would be if the Naveb learned what he was. He prepared to be something else, prepared to lie. He suspected that it would be easy, but he was still worried. Worry hardly ever left his mind, and now it had grown fat on the darkness that still surrounded him. Sparrow focused on steering his hoverbike, picking his way around piles of detritus, driftwood, gone falderall. They passed an enormous dead animal covered in crabs. As they neared Yim, he saw that something was wrong. More of it became visible, and there was something above it, a shape. There was something over the city, on the city. A gargantuan man-like shadow, wearing a red gold crown, was sitting on West Yim as though it were a throne. It looked out at the ocean, and black clouds swirled over its head. Where its face should have been, there were only two viridian eyes. Machuk gasped. "What is that?" she stammered. She saw it too. "Is that real?" Sparrow stopped the hoverbike and dismounted. "That is a god," he said. "What?" Machuk stared, galvanic and motionless like frozen lightning. Fear held her in place. When she turned towards Sparrow, her eyes were dark. "I don't understand. What is this, Sparrow? What can we do?" When she could stare no longer, when shock began to subside and left only the compulsion to do something, Sparrow let Machuk slide from the pillion and into his arms. She hugged him. "I go to Yim," he said, "and I do what I can." "We can't," Machuk sobbed. She kept trying to check the bizarre sight. Sparrow held her head against him so she couldn't. "We can't go there." "I, not we," Sparrow said. "We will find you a place to hide." Machuk nodded, but as they began searching for a place to build their debris shelter, she changed her mind. "Don't leave me here," she said, embracing Sparrow again. Sparrow remembered the little doe she had been when he'd met her, and he remembered what the gone girl's spirit had said to him, how she'd begged him to stay. "Okay," Sparrow said. "I don't know what we're going into, but we'll be together, just like before, in the webs. We'll figure this out. Have you ever seen anything like this?" "No." "Is there any chance it's something good?" "Let's just wait and see." The collapse woke sleeping powers, or maybe their awakening caused the collapse. Whatever the case, once the world went gone, beings that some had thought dead appeared again. They were great and they were terrible. They blew across the world like storms. People fell before them, dead, mad, or worse. Sparrow had never seen one, and he'd never known anyone who had. Now, here one was, hurricane big, and moonlight calm. If Sparrow had let it, fear would have paralyzed him, but he couldn't, because Yim was where he was going. That was what he decided, and he wasn't going to deviate again. He had agreed not to return to the haunted town, though every fiber of him demanded that he should. He wasn't prepared to make another change, another sacrifice. He would act on his will as he always had, even facing death, madness, or worse. He wouldn't compromise again. This resolution had nothing to do with moral philosophy. It was instead a matter of comfort. Capitulating made him feel unsteady in the world, and he needed to feel as steady as possible, or he couldn't act. If he gave in once, he might give in forever. Therefore, he had to assert himself now. And what better way to do that than to ride his hover bike straight into the mouth of madding doom? He said none of this to Machuk. She was having a hard enough time without also having to deal with him. He thought the best help he could give her was silent determination. When she was ready, he helped Machuk back onto the pillion, climbed onto his saddle, and pressed the accelerator switch. The hoverbike sped silent toward Yim. The god didn't move. Night came resplendent in starlight, and the god sat under its crown watching the ocean. Yim's chimneys continued to smoke. As they drew nearer, Sparrow saw people moving around outside the walls. Finally, the gates were near. Sparrow was surprised to find that they were just auto doors like he'd seen before. He parked his bike on the beach where no one would find it and engaged the grav brake. Then he and Machuk climbed a long wooden staircase to a square of ball courts. Behind chain-link fences, nets hung rotting from hoops mounted on poles. Beyond was a big rectangular building with many windows, most of which were intact. A group of Naveb greeted Sparrow and Machuk as they approached the doors, each taking Machuk into a brief embrace. They sang greetings, news, and questions, and Machuk was visibly shaken through all of it. The crowd of welcomers parted to lead them into the main building. In the dim atrium, Sparrow asked them about the god sitting on the western city. A man stepped forward to answer. He had a lantern jaw and close-set eyes. His black hair stood in a spike atop his head, supported by a complex array of bands and pins. The man introduced himself, saying, "We are Chuma." "I thought you were Naveb," Sparrow said. "What happened here?" "The West End belongs to Galhoth," he said. "He allows us to live here as an act of mercy." "Is he keeping you here?" Sparrow asked. "We can't speak for anyone else," said Chuma, "but we are here of our own free will. We were born here, and we have everything we need." Sparrow was confused. Finally, he realized what was happening. Chuma was referring to himself in the third person plural. Had Galhoth warped his mind? Sparrow didn't ask. That might be rude. "Do you communicate with the other territories?" Machuk asked. "Have you heard from the chiefs of RL?" "Not for a long time," Chuma replied. "We fear that they may have abandoned us, or that they may be dead." Sparrow looked around the entryway. Torches danced shadows across tile floors, torn couches, tipped luggage racks. In the middle of the room was a round island with a long desk around it. Behind the desk there were metal chairs, packed higher than Sparrow was tall. This antechamber stank, but at least it was dry. He may be unable to say what's really happening, Sparrow said to Machuk. Then he turned to Chuma. My name is Sparrow, and I'm here to help. Machuk told the other Naveb how Sparrow had rescued her, and how Lomep had heard the voice of Juk and gone into the sacred wilderness. Sparrow told them about the 4 Naveb who died trying to arrest him. They answered each story with tears. Outside, on the ball courts, they did some dances, lit some fires, and sang. They ate salted fish and long pads of soft garlic bread, and they drank rainwater from bowls made of bird skulls. It was a funeral and a celebration, at once lachrymose and jubilant. Sparrow watched them, fascinated. Firelight drew fervent faces, shadows in the lines of pain, and lit the whites of desperate eyes. They weren't unlike Ethel's people. When the ceremonies were over, everyone helped to put out the fire, store the food, and sweep the ball courts clean. When Chuma brought Sparrow and Machuk back into the firelit lobby and stood before the desk in the center of the room, he was sweaty and his body paint was running. We're grateful to both of you, he said. We can't imagine what you endured, escaping the savages and fleeing across the holy wasteland. Sparrow, it's in our power to pardon you across all our lands, if indeed any Naga but us remain. And I hope they do. We believe that they do despite ourselves. But returning Machuk isn't enough for us to commute your death sentence. Do you understand? We're sorry. I understand, Sparrow said. You need more help. You have one more task to put before me. You're wise, End-Worlder, Chuma replied. Earn forgiveness by going into the West City. That's all. You deserve more, but we can only give what we have. What a strange thing to say. Sparrow stroked his corkscrew beard. It was getting long again. Are you asking me for help? He said. Or are you sending me to my death? Chuma folded his arms over his chest. The matter's closed, he said. Take as much time as you need to prepare. And thank you. And if I don't go into the West City? Sparrow said. Then Machuk raised an eyebrow. You are a murderer. We'll stop there for now. Next time, we will finish chapter 8. Thank you, as always, for listening. And I will see you in the next video.